This week on Quality Digest Live, we look at the challenges and opportunities of advanced manufacturing in the United States.
That's right. Plus, auditors have questions, and we'll help you find the answers. That and more when we come back.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for May 3rd, 2013. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest Editor-in-Chief, Dirk Ducharme. Well, a team of researchers at Stanford has designed an entirely new form of cooling structure that cools even when the sun is shining. So you're probably thinking a solar-powered air conditioner. No, actually those have been around for a really long time. This technology actually keeps a building from heating up in the first place. The engineering problem that engineers and researchers at Stanford were trying to address is that the reflector that they're designing has to reflect as much of the sunlight as possible. Poor reflectors absorb too much sunlight and they heat up in the process, which actually kind of defeats the goal of cooling. But you have to reflect thermal energy within a specific wavelength, particular spectrum, so that it will pass through the atmosphere and into space. Outside that wavelength, and the radiated energy will interact with our atmosphere, contributing to the greenhouse effect. So you're kind of following what's going on here. Sure. Is they're building a reflector. It wants to reflect as much heat as possible, but the heat it reflects, you don't want it to heat up the atmosphere.
Right. It's got to be able to escape.
It's got to be able to escape.
Right.
And there is actually a range of frequencies that it'll do that. So they've designed they've engineered nanophotonic materials of quartz and silicon carbide, which are both really weak absorbers of sunlight. So the team was able to strongly suppress how much heat-inducing sunlight this panel absorbs while it radiates heat very efficiently in the key frequency range necessary to avoid the greenhouse effect that we were talking about. So the new device is capable of achieving a net cooling power in excess of 100 watts per square meter. By comparison, remember we talked earlier, one of the ways people have been using sun to cool a building is actually use solar panels. You use the solar panels to run an air conditioner, kind of a two-step process. But by comparison, today's standard 10% efficient solar panels generate about the same amount of power. That means in terms of radiative cooling, these panels could theoretically be substituted on rooftops where the existing solar panels feed electricity to air conditioning systems in order to cool the buildings. The idea is that you could either use no air conditioning or maybe smaller air conditioning units to cool a building, because the majority of the cooling would be done by these panels, simply by not allowing the building to heat up in the first place. So another way of looking at this is a typical one-story single-family house with just 10% of its roof covered by these cooling panels could offset 35% of its entire air conditioning needs during the hottest hours of the summer. So that's from our friends at Stanford. But it's kind of an interesting idea, obviously still in development, but it's kind of this elegant solution where a completely passive system that kind of eliminates the need for air conditioning, or at least allows you to use less air conditioning or smaller air conditioning units. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah,
and you know, it ties in with what a lot of our readers do, because I mean, it's trying to be efficient. You try to be as efficient as you can within the constraints of the system, and that's where the real creativity and the artistry comes in engineering is working within the constraints and making it work, and saving energy. I mean, it's what we're really all about.
And not causing a different problem. In terms of, in this case, they're talking about, you know, the greenhouse effect. So yeah, you could make a panel that redirects or reflects a lot of the sun's energy, but if all you're doing is heating the atmosphere around it, then you're solving one problem but contributing to another.
To another one, yeah. So it's interesting, but again, the constraints and the theory of unintended consequences are always to be kept in mind. Okay. Also in the news this week, a manufacturer named Connecticut Spring and Stamping has decided that when it comes to obtaining skilled workers, they're not going to rely on the government or the educational system anymore. They're taking the bull by the horns and doing it themselves. The article, and again, CSS, Connecticut Springs and Stamping, has written for us a couple times, and you all may be familiar with them. Their latest article it's called "Where Has All the Training Gone?" And it ran in Monday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. And it describes this particular problem, and what the company is doing about it. In short, like many manufacturers across the United States and across the world, actually, Connecticut Spring and Stamping is having difficulty finding skilled workers. Budget cuts to state-funded training programs and a lingering image problem for manufacturers among young people have contributed to a so-called perfect storm, leading to an absence of employees to fill some of these badly needed positions. I mean, we talk about it. We talked about it in our story meeting yesterday, or on Tuesday. Manufacturing still has this image, right? This image problem of what it is, and young people don't necessarily want to get involved in manufacturing in some cases. Right. So this is contributing to this perfect storm, as CSS calls it in their article, where they just aren't finding enough people. And it gets more complicated. Let me go on here a moment. The state of Connecticut has a formal apprenticeship program for skilled workers, but it demands up to 8,000 hours of on-the-job training. Now, that's a lot, but it's actually less of an issue than the 500 or more hours of classroom learning that the program demands. Again, that's the state of Connecticut's skilled manufacturing or skilled worker apprenticeship program. The problem is that it's so difficult for workers, say at CSS, to take off time to fulfill those academic requirements, right? I mean, the 8,000 hours, you're going to get that throughout the course of your working at CSS, let's say, but taking off and working nights and doing programs and homework and all that stuff is very difficult, it's rigorous. And it should be, but it's become a barrier to people going through that official apprenticeship program that Connecticut offers. And as a result, few workers participate. And what does that do? Of course, it exacerbates the problem with the shortage of trained operators. So again, CSS has responded to these issues by creating their own, this is interesting, their own in-house apprenticeship program.
Now, part of this was because there was no funding, not no fund, but because of cuts in state funding, it was harder to get those classroom hours, right?
Well, no, there have been cuts as well to the program, but the key issue is the program's still there, as far as I understand it from the article. The problem is attending the 500 or more hours that you need. I mean, it's finding the time to participate in that classroom learning. Again, the 8,000 hours of on-the-job work, which is what, about 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, you're going to be doing it anyway.
You're going to be doing it anyway, so that's not a big deal, as big of a deal. Now, the tracks that CSS has created with their own in-house apprenticeship program are geared specifically to the company's own processes and operations. Employees work at their own pace under guidance from experienced CSS team members. The company now currently has 11 workers enrolled in the program, and it's actually been a really great success. And I think this is probably a model, maybe a model, for some others, because again, they're not relying on the existing programs that may work and maybe too general. That's another problem here.
Sure, this is going to be specific to them. To
CSS. Right, CSS knows what they need. They know what they need in their operators. They know what they need in their skilled workers. Now, you may go through the in this case, the Connecticut's apprenticeship program, and you might get a spectrum of skills, and that's great. It's great for the employee who's going through that, the worker that's getting that training. But for CSS, for the manufacturer, maybe 20% of those are really relevant to what they're doing. Right. You know? Yeah. In this case, what these folks are doing at CSS is they're giving very specific tracks based on what they do with stamping and the rest of their functions there. So the workers graduate from the program, they have their hours, and they also have their work hours, they also have their learning hours. And now they're a skilled operator, specifically geared towards what CSS needs. It's interesting. It's a really good solution.
This does kind of address something that, and matter of fact, we'll be talking about this later too, but that industry itself has got to step up. I mean, you know, and a lot of this, you know, the government's got to do everything, and the government does have to participate. But in the end, if you're going to get what you want, do it yourself.
If you know what you want, and many of you know what you want. So, you know, it's interesting. For more information on the story, and remember all the stories that Dirk and I are going to be covering on today's show, click on the story links right below the player page, as always, right down there.
That's right. Okay. Well, in another article this week from Tom Kadala, Kadala tackles one aspect of the loss of manufacturing jobs.
Just what we were talking about.
It's kind of our jobs week.
That's right.
He doesn't blame exporting. He doesn't blame these job losses to exporting jobs to China. At least it doesn't seem to me that's really what he's talking about. What he's really looking at is from the perspective of how manufacturing has changed. You know, it's gotten a lot more complex, a lot more automated, and that means you need skilled labor, not unskilled labor. And this is the problem, and this is really the issue that is facing us in the U.S. is the skilled labor, just exactly what Connecticut Spring and Stamping was discussing in their article. Factories today are referred to as centers of advanced manufacturing. They're smaller, cleaner, they're a lot more automated, sometimes almost completely automated. If you've got Lego fans out there, go on Google and Google, I think, either Discovery or National Geographic and take a look at the Lego plant and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Kadala points out that the labor required to produce a GE refrigerator is only 1.8 hours. I have a GE refrigerator. And I can believe it's only 1.8 hours.
Yeah.
It's more like 30 minutes. Sorry. I digress.
No, not offending GE at all.
No,
please.
not at all. Which is actually less time. That 1.8 hours is actually about less time than it takes to install it at the customer's home and read the manual, such
What's
as
that?
it is. Okay, as we discussed last. And also, another thing is 3D printing. I mean, we discussed 3D printing last week with the Irby 3D printed card. 3D printing is really pushing the limits of customized products made with near zero waste.
Sure.
So, and
3D
also
printing, additive manufacturing,
additive manufacturing,
whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
All of those new manufacturing techniques are manufacturing, but they're high-tech manufacturing, and they shave a lot of time off the traditional design to production process, which could really translate into significant savings and competitive advantages. So, says Kadala, wages are becoming less of a contributor to the cost of production. And the focus on future investments has shifted away from countries with cheap labor to regions that offer a steady flow of skilled workers, access to specialized materials, and a basic infrastructure to move goods to consumers. I'm going to get back to that in just a bit. Kadala points to China, and that China has really tackled this face on. David Archelaus, Manpower Group's president of Global Corporate and Government Affairs, points out that the mayor of Tianjin, the fourth largest urban population in China, has started essentially paying for the education of any local student who chooses a STEM career, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Why did he do this? Because he learned from speaking with more than 2,000 foreign firms in the Tianjin area that their number one concern was a ready supply of skilled workers at the right cost. So there was a market, and the mayor said, great, we'll generate the students to fill it, and we'll fund it. We haven't been quite so bold in the U.S., although it actually sounds like a pretty good idea to me. What we've tried to do is to beef up our STEM education. We talk about that a lot, and you know, the grade school and high school. And we also try to let students know that manufacturing isn't quite as dreary as it used to be. It's actually pretty darn high tech. We're struggling in the United States, I think, to catch up. And as Kadala points out, as with Tianjin, other countries can bring up local talent and feed them into their own advanced manufacturing centers. The effect of that will be not only that we have problems supplying our needs from our own local talent, but we're not going to be able to bring that local talent in from overseas because they're going to be developing their own.
Yeah, you know who spoke about this really well was Thomas Friedman in several of his books. The World is Flat and several of his other books really talked about this issue where, you know, the United States in the 50s, 60s, and 70s really at that point didn't have a lot of people either really in engineering programs, but we had the brain drain because people came from India and China and Asia. They came over to the United States because here's where the opportunities were. Right. Well, now with the proliferation of technology and communications technology, you can be local. Right. Why would you want to move from Bangalore to the United States if you can stay in Bangalore and work at a high-tech manufacturing firm?
And why would a local region, including hopefully in the United States, why would they not want to bring up their own local people to work in advanced manufacturing centers? I mean, and these guys are picking up on it. We've talked about this before. In some ways, that is why developing countries are eating our lunch, is because they're going, hey, we have a need, we're going to fill it, we're going to fund it. And
we're going to fund it. That's the key thing. We're going to fund it. I mean, now we talked about CSS. And
they're funding it themselves.
They're funding themselves, but it's got to get funded somewhere. Somewhere there's got to be an incentive for people to want to do the work and get trained and do the jobs there. Or also, again, the work's going to go where the people are there that can do it.
We've got a couple comments related to this, if we can bring those up on the screen. This was on this article. Note to the manufacturing sector, whatever solutions our government may offer will be time late, ineffective, and costly. You'll ultimately need to solve this quandary on your own. Got an image problem? Redirect some of your marketing resources to glamorizing manufacturing careers to the candidate pipeline. Prospective employees ill-prepared? Collaborate, individually or collectively, with educational institutions, perhaps with a geographic or regional approach, to align programs with skill needs. Recruiting shortfalls? Have a conversation with the U.S. Marine Corps, the most effective recruiting organization out there. In other words, get creative. Our government will not. And that came from R.K. Uziak on our qualitydigest.com
I'd like
site.
to add something to that comment, because what we've seen, what we're hearing a little bit out there is there may be a little bit of a pay gap going on here too, where the offers for wages don't necessarily meet up with what they want.
The skill set,
you know, we had a story a couple months back where we talked about a want ad that somebody had dug up, where I can't source it, but somebody had dug it up, where they basically were looking for a master's degree in chemistry, 2 years of experience, a bunch of technical skills, and it was $17 an hour. And it's like, well, you know, for some people that's fine, but you know, you may not really get the candidate you want if you don't raise your offering a little bit too.
I think we had another comment.
Yep.
I'll just do that real quick. I would guess that more factory tours would fascinate students, especially seeing technology in use. They might want to get involved in the production of robots, for instance, or the computer programs that run them. It should start at a young age. The fascination with technology and manufacturing. Don't wait until they are juniors in high school to try and interest them. Make sure they have books that are interesting to read, experiments to try, teachers that have been in industry, not just a teacher who has only been a teacher. Encourage retired factory workers to teach, or even offer someone who has lost their job in manufacturing a teacher job.
Really good point.
DK Hayes. Yep.
Good point. Good point there.
So I mean, you know, it's a tough thing, and we talk about it a lot. But I think kind of the gist of all this is really it's got to be supported and probably even funded from industry itself. They're the ones who need it. Don't wait for the government to turn around and do it. Step up and
do it yourself.
Do it yourself, like Connecticut Springs.
Yeah, CSS has done. And it's a key issue. I mean, we talk about it a lot, and certainly it's not an issue that's going to go away. If most of us here are Americans who are watching the show today, I mean, if we, as Americans, want our manufacturing sector to be healthy and continue to be healthy, we've got to make the investment, I think, that some of the readers pointed out, and that Kadala pointed out in his article as well. I think really, really good food for thought there.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Dirk. Thank you, Tom Kadala. Okay. We had another article this week. We're going to turn to a slightly different topic, ISO auditing. The name of the article was from Miriam Boudreau. The name of the piece was ISO Audit. 5 not-so-easy questions, and that was again from Miriam Boudreau. There she is, and appeared in Monday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. Now, this, Dirk, as you know, this was an extremely popular article.
Oh, yeah,
I think...
This thing got read to death.
I think, and you can help me with this, I think it was our top-read article of 2013.
Yes, it was.
Maybe even going back into 2012 for a period of time.
People jumped right on that.
There was a lot of reasons. Well, why? Why was it so well-read? Well, first of all, it was well-written. Miriam always writes nice articles. Very easy to understand. It's extremely practical. You know, very, very practical, right? I mean, this really talks about the fear of auditors to a certain extent, how you overcome the fear of auditors. Maybe we all fear of auditors. You know, hey, I just submitted my taxes a couple weeks ago. I mean, even saying the word auditor sends a shiver up and down my spine. But I mean, you know, auditing, the process of auditing can be scary for people.
Well, we see it maybe as adversarial sometimes.
Maybe, and I'm going to get to that in a minute too, because I think that's a big part of this too. But I think that what Miriam is saying here is that it doesn't have to be scary if you're prepared for it. And she's trying to prepare all of us, all of you, to understand how you can deal with 5 questions that are pretty common. That hey, you're going to, you and your employees are almost certainly going to run into most, if not all, of these questions in your next audit. So let's go to them. Let's flip to these really quick. I want to show the 5 questions that we're talking about here, and I want to read them off for you and give you a little background on what she's talking about here. Okay, the first one. What is your quality or environmental or safety or information security, et cetera, policy? And this is a basic question. It's intended to ascertain whether the organization has communicated the policy to the employees and to make sure that those employees understand it. That's the intent. What you want to see out of that, the answer that you want is you want to understand that your employees are able to articulate the policy in their own words and apply it to their job functions. At a minimum, they should know how to access the policy itself. And that's important. I think that's really key, that they understand what it's about. 2, what are your objectives? This question applies to everyone in the organization. Its intent is to help the auditor understand that the organization has goals it wants to achieve, and it measures and tracks processes or product performance. And then, of course, the employees understand the quality objectives and their role in fulfilling them. Ideally, employees should understand goals and how to achieve them, and understand how to initiate corrective action if those goals are not achieved. Very important corrective action. 3, where do you get your processes from? Well, questions like this are bound to be on your audit because procedures or documents in general are an integral part of the ISO compliant management system. The intent is to see if employees regularly follow standard procedures. Ideally, employees should be fluent in explaining the procedures that apply to their jobs and feel fully invested. That's the key one, fully invested in the process. And at a minimum, they should understand that the standardized procedures exist within the organization. 4, what do you do if you find a nonconformance or a potential improvement opportunity? Of course, continuous improvement, as we know, is of paramount importance to achieving compliance with ISO standards. So the auditor will try to determine that employees recognize nonconformances and understand that systems have been put into place to address them. Ideally, employees will know when and how to use a nonconformance report and when to implement corrective actions or preventive actions. At a minimum, they should understand that the organization is dedicated to the concept of continuous improvement and that systems are in place to help achieve it. Finally, what are your responsibilities? There's another one of those broad questions, a lot of possible answers. The intent is to determine whether employees are aware of their responsibilities and their roles in the overall success of the management system. And ideally, employees will demonstrate their understanding of their responsibilities and how they contribute to the overall success of the management system. At a minimum, they'll understand and be able to talk about the tasks for which they're directly responsible. I wanted to do that. I wanted to read that because that right there, those 5 things were the heart of what Miriam was talking about in her piece. And the common thread you see there is you see that there's kind of a bare minimum for what employees should know. Employees should always know the basics. They should know essentially what they're doing, why they're doing it, how it contributes to the overall success of the organization. If you have employees that can really iterate that really clearly and really own it and really own that process, that's all the better. But at the minimum, they should understand their place within it. And that's anybody. That could be somebody who's in your office for 2 months.
I think we have a question that just came in.
Okay, sure. Let's see it. We love those questions.
Oh, there we go. Oh.
Oh, back to CSS.
Nothing to
okay.
auditing, but well, go ahead. This is a good question.
Well, sure. Okay. Does CSS hire trained instructional designers to create the learning and teaching programs? Is there any assessment to confirm outcomes of the program? Interesting program. And an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that, but it's a good...
My guess would be the first one, I'm not sure, is probably internally generated. My guess is the second one would be yes. I mean,
Yes.
they're obviously going to want to... They're obviously going to want to assess whether those people have the skills that they're training for. Because remember, they're specifically being trained, my understanding, they're being trained to work at CSS. So CSS is going to want to make sure that they've done their job.
And there is. Again, in the article right below the player page, you'll see more information about that. But there is a vetting process that goes on to make sure that throughout the process they're being, that they're conforming to what CSS needs them to be doing.
Exactly. And by the way, there should be... we'll send you, if there's not contact information within that article, Christopher, myself, the person who asked this question, we'll send you contact information at CSS. And if you're interested in getting more information on their training program, we'll put you in touch with them.
Great. All right. Well, let me turn back to Miriam, because I thought that question might be from Miriam's article, but that's okay. It's a live show, folks.
Live.
You know, that's the way it goes. But Miriam's point was well taken here. That you need your employees to understand the basics. You need them to really be invested as much as they can. And I kind of think what she's saying here is that, and others have said this too, and you know, Miriam said it, Umberto Tunisi says it, Denise Robitaille has said it, other contributors of ours have said it in the past, is that auditing, the process of auditing, should really not be stressful. You don't want it to be stressful. Miriam's article here is trying to defang the process a little bit. She's trying to say to our readers, that, hey, you're going to be audited, relax, here's some questions you can expect, don't worry about it, it's not a big deal. And you can get through it if you just have the basics down. You know, auditors, I think, really, I mean, the intent of auditors and auditing is to help you perfect your processes and to do your job better. Of course, they need to make sure you're in conformance to the standard or standards that they're auditing too, but really they're your partner. And you mentioned adversarial relationship before. I wonder about that sometimes. I don't think the relationship between an auditor and an auditee, between a registrar and a company that they're auditing to a standard, should or needs to be adversarial. But sometimes it may seem that way. And I think that these articles that Miriam and others have written are intended to try to help you, the auditee, maybe get beyond that. But I think the other part of the equation is maybe the registrars have to maybe do a little bit of their own PR on this and say, hey, you know, we're your partner on this.
Yeah.
You're our customer. We have to be tough. We have to be fair. We have to help you do better in again, conforming to a standard. But it's not going to be adversarial. You shouldn't be so stressed out getting ready for an audit. It's an opportunity to look at what you're doing, and if it's viewed from that perspective, it's better.
And if they do find something wrong, you know, a nonconformance, that's actually a good thing.
It's an opportunity for improvement.
It's an opportunity for improvement.
And that's the intent of this. Yeah. And I think that to me, that's why these articles are so popular. And generally
just
articles,
down to earth, yeah.
Well, because it's so practical. And it's a common fear. I mean, I think everyone out there who's going through audits and maybe audited to a standard, you know, it's going to be what your company's going to be about for the length of time. When you know an audit's coming, you're going to really be having to be ready for it, and it's going to take a lot of effort because you're nervous about it. Well, what Miriam is saying and others have said is we should try to get beyond that, look at it for what it is, use it as a tool to improve your organization. That's really right. The intent of auditing.
Yeah. Good article from Miriam Boudreau. She
Boudreau,
contributes quite frequently.
Right down there, check it out.
Interesting article coming up next week.
Yes.
Just wanted to kind of tease this a little bit. Keep your eyes open. Next week for an article by Mike Micklewright on how to be a good sorter. Remember, sort is the first step in the 5S process. That's a picture of Mike Micklewright.
There he is right there.
And it's the first step in the 5S process. And to do it properly, you must be, according to Micklewright, resolute, relentless, and above all, respectful.
The 3 R's.
So be sure to check out that article next week. It's a good story by Mike Micklewright.
And is that Monday, Tuesday? When do we know exactly?
Is Monday.
I think it's Monday, yes. Monday in QDD. We're going to be running that article from Mike. And speaking of Mike Micklewright, Mike was here a few months back, and we did some taping with Mike, and you're going to be seeing a lot more about that taping soon because we're coming out with a training series on that. But one thing he did when he was with us is he did a series of Pondering. Ponderings is about different elements of quality, deep thoughts with Mike Micklewright. Well, we have one for you today. We're going to actually have us play it out here as we go to the end of the show. And we want to check out these couple minutes. Really good stuff from Mike Micklewright. And again, look out for his article next week. And we'll see you next Friday right here on Quality Digest Live.
That's right. So long.
All right. See ya.
Did you ever wonder why we need to prepare for an outside auditor? You know how the story goes. There's an announcement that a customer auditor or registrar auditor or perhaps the FDA is going to stop by real soon and conduct that audit. So someone who has the authority within the company organizes the troops, calls a meeting, and develops a plan of action in which all the documents will be reviewed and finally followed, and all the areas within the plant will be painted and cleaned. Anything that does not look right, including records, will need to be discarded. Oh yeah, and most important of all, everyone needs to rememorize the quality policy, since the memorization of that very thought-provoking paragraph is what will make or break the company in the eyes of the outside auditor. I'll digress here for a moment. I have images in my head of my mother telling me to clean my room, and at one point in time, perhaps when I was about 10 years old, and in a real rush to go outside and play with my friends, I proceeded to clean my room by making the bed and then throwing all of my clothes and toys beneath the bed so they could not be seen. I then threw some more of my stuff into the corner of the closet, feeling ever so proud that my room was now clean and ready for inspection by the audit by my mother. Mom first smiled at the sight of a very clean room, but upon further review and deeper review, she discovered my attempt at preparing. This was my last attempt at preparing for an audit. Preparing for an audit sounds so noble, and yet in reality, it's just cheating. It's openly stating that one is not confident in his or her current system. It must make it look good in order for it to be acceptable. It's treating an outside auditor as if she's mom, cleaning everything up and hiding all the transgressions in the hopes that mom will not discover them. A good auditor will discover these transgressions and call them out, and do so in such a way that the transgressor will never be tempted again to cheat. Or should I say prepare? I'm Mike Micklewright, the wise guy.